Yeah.
And one thing you said earlier that was interesting, because I had a question about it. So TV and radio. Now, in the history of broadcast media, we started with the radio.
Yeah.
Then we moved on to the TV. So that was now the new hot thing. And then came social media. And now we have podcasts. And what you said was interesting, that TV in this part of the world and radio in other parts of the Middle East are still quite relevant. So I was thinking, I'm like, moving forward now with like podcasts, with like social media, there's so many ways to broadcast content. Do you think in a couple of years, the traditional ways like TV and radio are still going to be viable? Or do you think we're going to get to a point that tech has advanced so much, we're so ingrained in all these platforms and all these new ways to consume it, that that's not going to be useful anymore?
Yeah, that's a really good question. But I think, yes, they will. They'll definitely still be relevant, and they'll still be winning big. I think what I think is interesting now is that, for example, NBC, it actually has more of its audience are online than actually traditional like consuming content. So more people are actually consuming content for NBC through social media rather than actually traditionally sitting in front of the TV and watching a program. And like that's how it will go. Like definitely it's like the merger, it's like conversion media. So it's how things, the media sort of blurring the boundaries and how things are pivoting. Like even, you know, podcasts now, they're becoming like Apple, for example. One thing they're doing to try and wrangle a bit of the lion's share of viewership from Spotify is to actually create series out of their own Apple podcast. Like that's their intention. That's why they have Apple TV. Well, that's one of the reasons why they have Apple TV.
Sure.
So they're looking to kind of like, it's just the different ways that media, I think, are moving and finding different platforms to kind of make themselves relevant. But when you think of like, I don't know, ARN, for example, and radio, like, you can consume that through so many different platforms. Like for when we were in the office, we listened to Virgin and Dubai 92 through laptops and through our TV screens. And then there's the different ways that media is sort of moving beyond that. You know, Gulf News, for example, has its Gulf News Reach online platform. You know, Arabian Business did AB Live. It had its podcast arm to it as well. The National has a podcast too. So I think it's exciting for media at the moment because they're kind of operating outside of like the four walls of what maybe what they're known for, and they have to do that because if they don't, they'll fail. They won't be competitive. Audience habits are changing. You know, I think it's weird as well because there's a lot around like snackable content now. Like people's attention spans are getting shorter.
Like
so,
TikTok, for example, like the king of that. Yeah,
for sure. And then like through IG Live and Instagram, like 15-second pieces. And then, so that's one way like to reach like the youth culture. But then also like podcasts have come along as this kind of not really new kid on the block because they've been around since 2005, but they're sort of relevant now more so.
Exactly.
And they're longer. Like, you know, this podcast isn't 15 seconds. It's going to be definitely the way like we're talking. But yeah, it's like, it's crazy how like that it's defying like the trend for shorter content because podcasts are kind of completely different. And that's, you know, there's like, you know, This American Life, when that came on board and sort of really, I think, put podcasts on the map in terms of real kind of binge watch listening popular content like that. They were long. And then, you know, Joe Rogan's podcast, some of them are like 3 hours, right?
Yeah, I don't know how it does 3 hours, to be honest.
Exactly. And so that kind of changes things. But yeah, it's just how media is just moving and how audience like habits are completely changing. And again, this year as well, I think with people being on lockdown, having more time on their hands, that's where podcasts have won big, and I think radio and TV is thinking about how they move and what their next steps are. So yeah.
One thing you said actually that I didn't pay attention to that's so true is that, like you said, there's a big push right now for snackable content. So like 15 seconds, TikTok, quick, you consume it and you want more and more and more. But at the same time, the popularity of podcasts are increasing, which are much longer. So it's weird to have those two things going on at once. Why do you have a lack of attention here, but you have more of attention here? Is it maybe the content? Do you want more to a conversation? What do you think is the reason that those two things almost shouldn't exist at the same time? Do you understand what I mean? It's weird.
It is super. Yeah, it is strange. And but I think people just. I think if you go back to what people listen to and what they're looking for. So when you think about snackable content, it's always quick. You know, when you're on Instagram, you're scrolling, your attention span is short. Like that's a lot of the time why they do like text. Even on Facebook, when you watch a video, they have the text on the video because a lot of people don't actually listen with their sound on. So
so you'll just read along.
You're just reading it. But your attention span there is maybe because the content perhaps isn't quite as like is specific or targeted. You're just scrolling down, so you want something that's just going to hook you in. You know, if they haven't got you within the first few seconds, you switch off. And
True.
That's like, I mean, and that works for like the generations coming up, so the Gen Y, whatever version of generation we're on now, like they're literally like that works for them because they're of that culture which is like instant gratification. That's
exactly
where TikTok wins big, but podcasts as well, like that's, I think, completely different. And when you listen to a podcast, you know, you're not an accidental listener. You don't just happen upon a podcast. You listen to it because you have a very specific like interest in that one. Like, you know, if you're interested in a podcast around, I don't know, psychology or business or sport or whatever, then you're going to be focused on that and you're going to have an interest in it. So therefore, I would say it's, you know, the longer form content works because it's playing to everything that you're keen on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the rates for like consumption on podcasts, like I think 93% of people that listen to a podcast finish it. So
wow, that's huge.
It's massive.
That's really big.
And like even in this region, I think the average length of podcast is about like 48 minutes. So on that, like if people are listening to most of that, then, and even for like a brand, like, because that's the way we come at it, you can say a lot in that time. So
of course,
it's huge. So yeah.
One thing that you were talking about, like, you're so right. You don't accidentally like listen to a podcast. It's not like music. You're on the radio, a song comes on that you weren't planning to listen to, and you're like, and then you find out about it. A podcast is a very targeted thing that you're going out to seek. But I think the contrast between the two, because I think all of us, but like you said, the younger generation for sure, it's snackable content for sure. But I think like in the older generations, you find that snackable content's cool and it can be addictive, and I can stay on TikTok for like an hour, like, not gonna lie, just like scrolling. It's endless entertainment. But
yeah.
I think with podcasts, why there might be a big push towards it is value. What's your, like, this I'm watching for entertainment, but this I'm listening to or watching for genuine value. I want to get something from this, whether it's an insight, whether it's a tool, whether it's just something I'm passionate about. There's some value that I'm going to come out of that. I think that might be the contrast between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. You're listening to be informed. You're listening to educate yourself, and you're listening to get something from it. So yeah, you're listening to it. Your kind of motivations for listening to are probably quite different.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, like, and there's so many different platforms now. Like, I mean, it's been great to see like this year, like Angami sort of come into the mix as like for this region, from this region, and then you've got like the usual suspects of Spotify and the Apple out there, and it's just it's really good. And like we work with this one brand, Finyal Media, and they basically have this big podcast network just for Arabic speakers, and they create like Arabic fiction series, and it's great to see what they're doing as content creators and curators, that they're putting that together and having very dedicated, like, specific content. And you know, you see podcasts winning massively in Saudi as well, like
huge.
There's a huge audience there. And it's good to see like these, because I guess like, you know, in the UK, for example, we have Ofcom, you know, that regulates everything to the nth degree. Like there's nothing here at the moment anyways, for podcasting. So it's this big sort of open forum, unregulated forum that people can speak in a very kind of unapologetic, very free manner that people are loving. And, you know, podcasts win big with like youth just as well as like with older people as well. Like the split is pretty much, there's not really much in it, so it's good to see. Like I think there's a podcast for anything you're interested in
by now. For sure, literally anything from cooking to therapy to anything in between. You'll find something 100%.